Hello and welcome back, and in today's video I'm going to help you see the difference between a value series NAS and that of a prosumer business kind of fully featured NAS solution from Synology, because although pretty much all modern Synology NASs arrive with DSM, and more particularly DSM 7.1 and 7.2 around the corner, it's worth highlighting that the more affordable value entry-level series from Synology that arrive with either Realtek or ARM-based processors, or are classed by the J series there on the model ID, typically arrive with a different version of DSM. And by version, what I mean is a number of apps, services and features are not available that would otherwise be available in more prosumer powered devices. Now, these can fall into two categories, really. On the left hand side of the screen, there is what I would consider the ARM systems. These are powered by CPUs that are designed around being very, very efficient. In this case, it's the recently released DS223. Now, this CPU inside the system, Realtek RTD 1619B, what a catchy name, is a CPU designed around using as little power as possible. ARM processors are more often found inside mobile devices, Chromebooks, ultimately devices that are designed to run off either limited power or are going to be on for such huge lengths of time that they really can't withstand the degradation or power consumption of a more aggressive processor. Now, ARM-based processors, the way they work is, much like any CPU, instructions are sent to the CPU to be actioned and vice versa for the CPU to action things. It's a rotational thing with the CPU and a computer ultimately reading the room and giving orders. However, an ARM-based processor works with compressed instructions. It's what allows the CPU to action these things using much, much less power. Now, that is an oversimplified, bastardized version of the reality, but it's just the easiest way to describe it in this context. Now, the other group of Synology NASs use a kind of CPU more classically described as an x86 processor. Now, although both the CPUs that I'm talking about here are 64-bit, it is worth highlighting an x86 processor doesn't require, or at least doesn't rely upon, the compression of those instructions in the same way an ARM-based NAS does, or ARM-based NAS. Now, on the left-hand side of the screen is a DS223, and on the right-hand side of the screen is a DS723 Plus. This one arrives with a CPU with a much higher clock speed, and although the CPU in the ARM processor is 4 cores, the 2 cores, which are also 4-thread inside the DS723, are far more capable. They've got more power and they can do more and handle longer and bigger instructions from within that central processing unit there. So, how does that impact DSM? Well, within DSM, you have a number of different applications, and although they both look near enough identical in this window, it's the range of services and applications that you have open to you that will differ substantially across both of these platforms. And if you are someone that's always used an ARM or ARM-based NAS over the last few years from Synology, chances are you've been missing out on a series of different applications. Now, modern releases in ARM-based NASs have actually included a lot more of the features such as BTRFS and features such as snapshot and snapshot replication. They have been added to recent releases in the ARM-based NAS series, but there's still a lot of applications missing there. Now, to give you an example of some of those, I'm going to read from my notes here. Probably the biggest omission that you're not going to see on an ARM-based NAS, and probably one of the biggest apps currently that Synology put all of their development time and energy into, is called Active Backup Suite, or Active Backup for Business, or Active Backup for Google Workspace or Office 365. This application is a centralized backup tool that runs between different classes of Windows system, Mac system, VMs, cloud storage, local storage, and it is an image level backup tool. You might be thinking, I've already got a backup tool on my NAS at home. I've got Hyper Backup. Hyper Backup for me does all of that backup stuff that I think I need to do. And yes and no, it does do a lot of those things. And you've also got Cloud Sync that also allows you to synchronize with a cloud platform. But this is a very different kettle of fish. If you look at Hyper Backup, for example, Hyper Backup allows you to back up files and folders, not whole system image or within an operating system. It only backs up the individual files and folders. Whereas active backup, on the other hand, can run OS level backups. Think Mac, Apple, Time Machine stylized backups there, and that can run with third-party Linux servers. It can run with Synology NAS. You can back up the entirety of the NAS. That's right, Brian, free. I'm well aware of our little conversation by email. 100%, you were right to remind me of that. You can back up a myriad of different system OS image level backups. It does require a powerful system to do it, but it's nice to have that feature there straight away off the bat, and that's something I think it will be very difficult to ever see on an ARM powered CPU NAS there. Again, active backup extends not only to just that level of backups, but you've got the backup agent, so you can back up your NAS that you have here onto another NAS, whole system file folder breakdown. Then you've got synchronization with Google Workspace if you choose, where you can synchronize your entire SaaS software as a service account in the same way. The same goes for Office 365. And although I'm going to talk about lots of different applications that are either absent or minimized between these two different kinds of Synology NAS, that is probably the biggest and most impactful difference between an x86 NAS and an ARM-based one. I should also highlight as well that what I'm seeing is reversed to you. So when I'm pointing at that one, I'm pointing at a different one. So I apologize if it looks like I'm pointing at the wrong one. Now, other applications that are worth touching on that are absent on an ARM-based NAS system are a little bit more business, but are still worthy of comment. For example, the Central Management System tool allows you to overview and check a series of different Synology NAS systems from a single portal access point. Now, I know a number of you might be thinking, wait, isn't that Active Insight? Active Insight is a few runs higher up the ladder, and in most cases, if you're installing Active Insight on an ARM-based NAS, you're doing so because it is being monitored from afar, not so much that you are using it to action anything. Now, with Central Management System, you can push updates, you can get notifications and alerts on different systems, and you can monitor the behavior and health of multiple NASes in a system environment, and that is in-house or remotely. Now, why is that only limited to more powerful NAS systems? One, it's going to require a low degree of latency there. I hate seagulls, but also it's going to be dedicating a lot of that system resources to keep on top of these things. Also, it is a very enterprise businessy style app, and frankly, most ARM-based NASes, aren't really built for purpose in that kind of storage network environment. You'd use up way too many of your resources to try and action it there. The next application I want to talk about is Synology High Availability. Now, this is one I'm kind of disappointed is not available on ARM-based systems. Now, what do I mean by that? If we open up Synology High Availability, Synology High Availability is an app that allows you to take two Synology NASes that are identical in the storage, identical in their hardware architecture, so they've basically got to be the same NAS with the same drives, and it pairs them together. And this server relationship, often referred to as a cluster, is comprising of an active and a passive server. And what happens is, if one of those systems dies, the PSU dies, it breaks, the motherboard fails, whatever, the other system can take over. And if you've got lots of remote accessing users for your business needs, or even a small number of home user needs, although this is stepping outside the home remit, it allows those users, in the event of that NAS dying, to have a failover. And if it's being used for backups or shared folders for your small business, this can be vital. Why am I kind of sad it's not available as an ARM-based NAS app? Largely because of the affordability of ARM NASes, some users, rather than buying a mid-range or moderately powered 4-bay, may want to buy two low-powered 2-bays, such as the DS223, and have those in a high availability cluster, and therefore they can share their photos on there or have it as another tier to their backup strategy. And sadly, whether it is a hardware failing where the ARM-based processor there is just not going to be good enough to manage and support and keep stable that cluster, or simply that Synology consider this a far more enterprise level product and therefore they want it running on more powerful enterprisey systems, then ultimately it's just not available as an app on the ARM platform NASes there. moving forward, we can talk about our next application. You may have noticed it at the top there, and that is the hybrid share application. Now, hybrid share is available on both platforms there, but the speed and synchronization of hybrid share differs when you switch between the two of them. So as far you may not be aware, hybrid share allows you to use the Synology C2 cloud platform and effectively bolt it on to your local Synology NAS, and therefore use all of your Synology applications and services, and it treats that storage that you've bolted on from the cloud as if it's local. Now, why does that differ in some way from when we're talking about something like Cloud Sync? Well, Cloud Sync doesn't do it the same way. It synchronizes with a cloud platform, but the Synology knows it isn't localized. It also knows that it can't treat it like it's localized. And although you can have a synchronized folder on your NAS, that's not strictly the cloud. It can be a copied version of that, but it's not the same thing. And if you've got multiple users that rather than connecting with the NAS, they're connecting with a local C2 cloud space, that C2 cloud space can then be synchronized with the NAS, and therefore it allows you to be more efficient about using the Synology apps and services with that area of storage space. Now, although it's available on both platforms, because of the more modest hardware specification of ARM-based NASes, it does not run as well. It does run, and you will have that level of synchronization, but the CPU resources you will consume when doing that makes it far less efficient, and therefore kind of loses some of its sparkle and charm there. So again, it's included, but it doesn't run to the same standard that I would like to see from that hybrid share application. Next application I want to talk about is Presto File Server. Again, a highly business-led application. Now, Presto File Server, if we bring it up down here, bring it up on there, I'm going absolutely blind. Why don't I just type the word Presto? Presto File Server is a high-speed file transit communication platform. It does require a license, and again, you can get a trial on there, hence making it a lot more business, but it creates a high-speed tunnel between server file transmission devices there. So again, NAS to NAS, or end user with that file Presto Server client application. Again, the odds of this running in the way that it's been intended, once again, I hate seagulls, running as well as you would like on ARM-based NAS is going to be fairly low end. And this is one of those few apps that I agree with Synology should not be on the ARM platform. It just doesn't give the same level of performance, and the whole idea of Presto File Server is fast moving file transit there, and it's just something you're not going to get out of these lower end ARM based NAS CPUs. So again, its absence makes sense to me. Next up, let's talk about the most obvious omission, virtual machine usage. Now, for those that aren't aware, Synology has a great virtual machine management tool. This virtual machine management tool allows you to create virtual machines such as in Windows, Ubuntu and other supported OSs, much like you would on your desktop PC. These run from within the server and allow you to access them anywhere in the world, bearing in mind latency and network and internet connectivity. Now, virtual machines, unlike Dockers and containers, and of course Dockers are another thing that are absent on the ARM-based platform, Dockers allow you to create individual kind of apps without the need of an operating system or a hypervisor for you to run. So these can be running apps and services on a almost command level way, which are then sort of running held within the Docker application. A virtual machine, on the other hand, is the OS. You're assigning it virtual CPUs, you're assigning it a portion of the system's memory, and you're treating it like it's got a virtual motherboard, a virtual PC case, and the works, even a virtual output that you can access remotely. So why do I think ARM-based processors are never going to have things like containers in the Docker application there, or virtual machines? Well, put simply, those CPUs and the level of instructions, those CPUs that you're going to find in the ARM value entry-level based Synologies that rely on compressed instruction to and from the CPU, you can't really do that to virtual machines and Docker applications without undermining their performance as a whole. And it comes as no surprise that you're not going to find these kind of apps running within DSM, because that's crucial, because outside of DSM it's not impossible. But to have that running from within DSM, hypervisor leveled, it's just not going to be possible on the ARM platform, and it's one of those things that maybe we might see a Docker application on an ARM-based NAS eventually, but even then it would be a struggle. But as for virtual machines, I just can't see it happening, and it's one thing that if you're a value NAS user all these years, you've probably missed out on. Now, the other app I should probably talk about, at least in as far as the DS223 goes, is to do with Plex. That's right. Right now, Plex Media Server is not available for the newest generation of ARM-based NASes. Now, this is on the 6th of Feb 2023. The new generation of Synology value NASes that have got the RTD 1296B, that app for Plex is currently not available. Plex has yet to develop or at least modify an existing installer to put Plex Media Server on this architecture. It's not down to Synology to create that app. Plex has to create that application, submit it to Synology, and then Synology add it to their range of third-party contributors here at the bottom. So right now, if you are looking at installing Plex Media Server on a NAS, you aren't going to find it on the newer generation value series. You will find it on the current generation of x86 ones, right, like this one. But if you're looking at value series NAS as a media server and you were kind of thinking about playing with it, just bear in mind that it's not there at the moment, but that will change. Otherwise, you can always opt for MB instead, which is still a great tool that still has all of that lovely metadata scraping. It just lacks a lot of the free client applications of something like Jellyfin. And of course, if you do use MB and you want to run it on your client devices, some of those client apps are paid for as well. So do bear that in mind. But those are the main differences, at least in terms of the user interface and the applications you can use between an ARM powered NAS and an x86 powered NAS. But it's worth touching on a few last things before we end today's video. Number one, not all ARM-based NASes are built the same. Synology in the last 2 decades has released several different CPU-led NAS families, and ARM CPUs they have used well in excess of 10 to 12 different processors in that time. In that time, some processors have had higher clock speeds than others, some of them have had fewer or more cores, and some of them, such as the Realtek series, have got 4K transcoding built into them and others don't. The point I'm making is an Annapurna powered Synology NAS is not going to perform as well as a Realtek ARM powered NAS, and just because a NAS is ARM doesn't make them identical. So what that means is, in terms of say surveillance, a newer generation Realtek ARM will support more cameras in surveillance station, for example, than an Annapurna AL217 or 214 from a few generations ago. So again, just because you might be using an older generation ARM NAS doesn't mean if you move to a new generation ARM powered NAS that you are still going to not get these apps or services. The newer generation ARMs, they've added a few things, again, snapshots, stuff like that, and BTRFS support, but also these CPUs, although efficient, are efficient and in some cases more powerful. So you can still use more cameras, 12, 15, up to 20 in some cases. So do bear that in mind if you are feeling like you're slightly put off going for another ARM-based NAS. Another thing worth highlighting is, again, I mentioned BTRFS, but pretty much all the ARM-based NASes that you can buy, right the way down to the lowest of the low J series, support Synology Hybrid RAID. That is that fluid RAID system from Synology that allows you to mix and match the hard drives that you choose to use. So if we head in here, let's find the storage manager there. With SHR, you can mix and match whatever drives you want. Again, big, small, Synology, the Synology will work it out for you in the larger arrays. Now, those of you looking at 2 bays like this one might be thinking, well, Synology Hybrid RAID is fairly useless anyway, I've only got 2 bays. Wrong, because if you've been using SHR in an ARM-based NAS, and down the line you upgrade to like a DS923 or something bigger, a 1621, or even the highest of the high, DS3622XS, a Xeon powered monster, you can just pull those drives out and pop them in your new x86 powered NAS, and SHR will be picked up there, and then you can add those new mixed drives to the array and make things bigger and better. But do bear in mind that when it comes to x86 NASes, they don't all support SHR. Unlike the lower end ARM based NASs, when you move over to the Intel, the AMD based NASs, the x86 ones, some of them, such as the XS series, the SA series, the UC series, and some of the more powerful rack station devices, they do not include support of Synology Hybrid RAID. So in some cases, that's one of an example of a very few small number of things which are only available on an ARM platform universally, but only partially available on an x86 platform. Finally, and this is the last point before we wrap things up, to do with memory, because an ARM-based CPU, although they've improved in recent years, there is a huge amount of focus people need to make on the amount of memory included inside the system, because sometimes that can be a bigger bottleneck than the CPU, depending on your process. To put that into perspective, the DS223 on the left here and the DS723 on the right here, although very different in price, power, capability and apps, both arrive with 2 gig of memory. Now, certain apps and services such as Synology Drive, the number of cameras in surveillance, not so much virtual machines, but definitely connected hosts and what they are doing are very memory dependent. And a lot of ARM-based NAS systems do not allow you to upgrade that memory, which is going to be a real heal if you're going for things like a DS120J, which only, and a 220J, which only have half a gig of memory to play with there, which in many cases will be a lower glass ceiling for the apps and services you can run and the extent you can run them than the CPU, because you just don't have enough memory to play with when the OS is running. Case in point, right here, we're not doing anything with this DS223 Play, and the CPU at 4%, but the memory is already at 32% utilized. Conversely, on the DS723, we're running 2 cameras, we're running several multimedia applications, we're running serious backups, we're doing all manner of things in the background on this NAS that are far more intense, some hibernating and some not. And the memory there is at 58, whereas it's running at 32%, and I'm doing nothing on the DS223. So do bear that in mind with ARM NASs. So they are, for me, the most important differences between going for an ARM CPU based NAS, I'm absolutely sick of saying that word, right or wrong now, and how it compares in both features and overall experience with that of an AMD or Intel x86 Synology NAS. I really hope you found this video helpful. Again, I know this is going to appeal to a particular niche kind of person who are really on the balance about buying their system, but I really hope it has helped someone. Let me know in the comments if it has. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Click like if you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe to learn more, and use the free advice section over on NAS Compares. It's the link below with the big blue button on the right hand side of the page where you can get free advice. Otherwise, there's the free community forum at Ask NAS Compares, made by me, Eddie, who does most of the work on there, to be fair, and other members of the NAS community to answer your questions. And finally, if you found this video helpful, and if you were going to go to Amazon anyway, very, very important, if those 2 things are true, please use the links in the description to take you to Amazon. It won't cost you anything extra, and whatever you buy, and I do mean anything that you buy, when it takes you there, myself and Eddie, the only people here at NAS Compares, we get a kickback which goes directly back into what we do. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.